What time?
We need to.
There's just 10 more minutes. I don't know.
And also, what else should I send you on WhatsApp to put on the pen drive?
Check, is it working, Rasha?
Send me the link.
I will
No, not here, not here. First send it to me. All of these.
Leave it. I have my reset. Yeah,
Live stream.
I don't know. Ask me. If they are doing it, then why would we?
We can see you.
Check. I'm there. Hi.
Not should you share it now?
Already
I can share it from.
in the
Share the link in the group.
Yeah.
Share the link in our group also. The computer is all of you have numbers.
I think I'm there.
Yeah, we can
Who
share
is
on
admin? Share the
our
link.
status or something. Also. No, someone.
Where are we keeping it?
Sorry?
I think, sir, where should we keep it?
Hey, Ajay, we have to do this thing also. Wait. मेरा फोन वहीं पे. We need a desk.
Get it from outside.
CPT.
Another room, then they have desk. Or only chairs I could see.
CPT is I'll call CPT stuff.
Hindu, go with Abhishek. Until for desk or table.
Shall we keep it from here?
Can keep it right now,
But if the person comes and speaks from here,
but they won't be there till
Can you do it?
एक को तो वहाँ पकड़ के रखना होगा ठीक है
माइक काम कर रहा?
But really, even though I was far, everyone was there and words full of appreciation here. Yeah, really. Because I think it was very important for the discussion. Presence mattered a lot. Okay, so you'll join us. You'll join us. But see if it's possible.
मोबाइल की कॉल చేసి సరమా मोबाइल की कॉल చేయరా ఎందుకంటే మాట్లాడితే
Yeah, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Pragya Singh, on behalf of the Department of Translation Studies, warmly welcome you all to the Translators Meet as part of the celebration of International Mother Tongue Day 2025. Welcome, all of you. I request all of you to kindly take your seats. Let's begin with the inaugural session of the day. And for that, I request Professor Sonia Salve, Dean of School of Literary Studies, Professor Lakshmi Tribandi, Senior Professor Lakshmi Tribandi, Senior Professor, Department of Translation Studies, Dr. K. Hovina, Assistant Professor, Department of Translation Studies, and Professor Pankaj, our head of the Department of Translation. I request Professor Lakshmi Haribandi for her welcome speech or for her welcome speech. Professor Somba Sante, our Dean School of Literary Studies, Dr. Head Department of Translation Studies, Dr. Kokila, and today's special guest, the translators, Dr. Kamala Dr. Jaya Srinivas, and of course our colleagues, Sanjay Kumar, Sandar Bhargava, Sanjita, Prakash, and other guests, our colleagues sitting there. So, they're practicing. So Vani, Ikshita, and Leena, Nikhila, other colleagues and guests and friends. I take pleasure in welcoming you all to this Translators Meet organized by the Department of Translation Studies on the occasion of International Mother Language Day 2025. Though we celebrated International Mother Language Day on 21st February, but basically we are celebrating it today. We in the Department of Translation Studies will take pleasure in organizing a meet of the translators so that they could interact with such scholars, and this is a kind of a meet which is really in practice. So they will share their experience of translating different kinds of things. I think all of them have different expertise. For instance, the Jayashi was not Kablatar, I think specializing in the translation for Kannada into English and vice versa, and others various kinds of texts. So it's going to be a rich experience for all of us, scholars and students, to know from the horse's mouth directly from the translators their experience of translating the text that they have done. Whether the translators themselves come up with some theoretical insights as to what they have done, what benefited the translation, it's up to the scholars working in the Department of Translation Studies to formulate some theory out of what they hear from these practical translators. More on this later perhaps. So thank you so much for making it here. I welcome you all once again. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Haribandi, for your long welcome speech. Now over to the chair, Professor Takeshwar.
Now I request the Dean of our school to inaugurate the meet with his few words.
Former Vice Chancellor, our former Vice Chancellor, Professor Haribandi Lakshmi, Madam Garu, Professor Tativar, Head of Department, Dr. Kokila, Dr. Srinivas Rao, Dr. Kamlakar Bhatt, and other translators of today's meet, students and friends, and other my colleagues. As far as translation is concerned, I am layman. Yet I should speak since I am inaugurating. So, Mother Language Day is celebrated not only to preserve mother tongue, but also to promote linguistic and cultural diversity. Further, preserving mother tongue helps maintain cultural richness, which contributes to inclusive and equitable society. Being fluent in one's mother tongue helps one learn second language accurately and quickly. Apart from increasing one's worldview, learning second language or learning new language increases one's self-confidence and self-esteem too. Indeed, knowledge of language is the doorway to wisdom. As the Turkish saying goes, one who speaks only one language is only one person. But the one who speaks two languages is two persons, is two people. He or she, two people. One who speaks two languages. The translators speak two languages, therefore any translator is two person or two people. In this way, the translators who speak two languages is not only one person, but he or she is two persons. Translators with their broad world views act as a between two languages, facilitating communication between the speakers of different languages. I am sure and certain to say that the translators play a significant role in revitalizing and preserving the languages. I do hope today's translators meet would discuss and exchange new ideas which will help students and the faculty members of the Department of Translation Studies. I wish you all the best. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Now I request Professor Rakesh to share a few words.
Our Dean, Professor Sambha Sarve, my senior colleague, Professor Lakshmi, and Dr. Kokila, and translators and my colleagues, and our research scholars and students. It's a privilege to be here today on the occasion of Mother Languages Day, and I'm very happy to chair this session. So the celebration is going to be very brief, so that we can pave way for the interaction with the translators. So let me briefly outline why we have organized this event. So generally we think that we are doing research and translation today, but people think that we are translating, but we are not translators. But we are, even if we are translators, as our dean was saying, that's a different personality of ours. So when we are translator, we are a different person. When we are a researcher, we are a different person altogether. Because, so in that sense, the translation studies scholars are parasites. If there are no translations, then there is no work for us. So we depend on them. But there is also a kind of hierarchy in academia. Translators are looked down upon, and translation studies scholars are looked down. Because we can speak for hours together on translation, even if I have not done translation. Even if I am not a good translator, I can give 10 hours lecture on the translation. The person who has done a good translation, they will not be able to speak. Let alone they occupying the space on the stage, they are not even, they don't even occupy the space on the cover page. They are shunted inside the book. Sometimes at the end they will say translated by so and so after the entire thing is over. And interestingly, in translation studies we also talk about the status of translators and status of translation. Both are that we look at translation as a second grade activity and not a original work. And similarly, translators, they respond to good literature. They themselves can't write good literature. And many, even those writers who have done translations, they also think that, many of them, before you become a good writer, you should try your hand in translating. So it's a kind of apprentice job. Once you learn the trick of the trade, you don't have to translate. You just have to write. So they look down translation as a kind of apprenticeship before you become a professional writer. So in that sense, in the society in general, in the academia, the translation and the translators are looked down. But many of the translators are the ones who have given the key concepts that is used to talk about translation even today. Cicero, Dryden, and even Pilar, cross-creation or somebody people use. So these are the words that we commonly encounter in when people talk about translation.
From Indian context to Indian.
No, our concept is not so popular in society. It is in academia. I am only talking about so popular like word to word, sense to sense, literal, paraphrase, and then transcreation. So these are the words that have become popular. So somewhere there seems to be a kind of contradiction in that. The popular terminology to describe translation and translators is provided by the translators, but somehow they themselves occupy the second lead position. So how does it happen? Because the translation studies as a discipline has emerged only in the last 50 years, if you want to call it as a discipline. In fact, when we announced translation studies with a much fan in the 1960s and 70s, we called it as a discipline at all. Discipline. But today we know that it is not a discipline, it's an interdisciplinary area of research. So in the last 50 years, translation studies has emerged as an area of research. But translation always had its own state. And it fulfilled all our requirements as a society. No society can survive without translations, without competing in other languages and acquiring what it thinks as useful for it from other languages. So, one of the post-colonial scholars says that every culture has to be translational and transnational for its own survival. Obi Baba. So, if you don't translate, then you will die. The language is kept alive, the language keeps on changing, adapting itself to the changing world. Only if there are new concepts being created in that language. And it is the translators who does that. It is the translators who shape your language, who kind new terminology in your language, who bring in new things of cognizance of the things which are happening elsewhere in your language. And our entire language is, in fact, where we think that these are the words, concepts taken from other languages, are brought in through translation. So, the translators who constantly engage in this kind of negotiation with the economy that exists in other language, your economy with that exists in other languages. So constantly there is a give and take that is happening between languages. If our language is not dead, it is because of translation. And think of all those languages where the translation is not happening now, we call them as dead languages. Because it has stopped translating, it has become dead. Even take the case of Sanskrit. Once upon a time, everything was getting translated into Sanskrit from different languages, and similarly, Sanskrit became the source for other languages. Today, English is trying to occupy that kind of space in the entire world. Everything is getting translated into English, and then from English, it's going into other languages. So, in a way, English is acting like a gatekeeper of knowledge today. That's a different issue. So, for any culture to survive, it has to be constantly in translation, constantly in flux. Once you stop changing, that means that is the death of knowledge. It becomes a museum piece. And who are the people who actively engage in it is the translators. Not only the written translators, even the oral translators. Somebody goes to some other place and comes back and talks about it in your language. They're bringing in new ways of looking at the world or new things, new concepts into your language. So when translators occupy that kind of space, where do we look down upon them? That we have to ask. Emerged within translation studies as one of the approaches. Within the gender hierarchy, women is looked down upon, and within this translation economy, author is given as original writer, as if you are not original. Each translation is as original as the quote unquote original. So this concept of original and then the translation, that has been the problem that we have had. And without the translators, I wouldn't have known Tolstoy. I wouldn't have known many other writers. If I know them, if they live in my consciousness, then it is thanks to the translators. Otherwise, nobody would have known them. If certain texts have not been translated into Tibetan or Chinese, you wouldn't have known many Buddhist texts because they are not original, quote unquote, original texts are not available in Pali or in Sanskrit. But they survive in translation. It says it gives an afterlife to the text. If the text is still living, you should be thankful to the translator who translated it. So in that sense, translators play a very important role. But unfortunately, within translation studies too, we did not take translators seriously. We only earlier, the framework within which we looked at translation studies is that, oh, here the translator has not done justice to it. Oh, here there is a loss. Oh, here there is some creativity. So we are trying to judge the translators. This was the earlier mode of translation studies, which was mainly comes from a linguistic framework, where it was thought that the duty of the translator is just to match the concepts that are there in that language with the concepts that are already there in this language. So that's why the concept of equivalence became much more important in translation studies. Which rule the rules? Oh, they are not equivalent. How can you make them equivalent? Each language is different. There are no equivalents. It is translated. Certain equivalents are question, accepted unquestionable, and certain equivalents are not accepted unquestionable. You question them. Earlier we accepted that religion means dharma. Now people are saying, no, dharma is different, religion is different. Not only in translation studies, not only in linguistics, but even in religious studies, even in sociology, even in political field today, there is a discussion is happening about whether religion is dharma or not. Dharma is different from the religion. So some translator has made them equivalent. We accepted it. Now we are questioning it. And you can question all the equivalents. There is nothing sacrosanct about the accepted equivalents. And why we create them as equivalents? Why do we accept them as equivalents? Why we don't accept them as non-equivalents? Something that we are investigating as translation studies scholars, not judging and evaluating the translators. Though assessment and translation criticism is part of our applied translation studies, where we need to assess the translations, of course, because the translation is an industry today, and translators are paid for the translation. And now, even the agencies which give monetary award to original writing, have started sharing part of the award money to the translators. In that context, we need to have some kind of framework, but there are different frameworks for assessing the translation too. That's a different issue, we're not getting to that. The point that I was trying to make was, we did not take translators seriously. We only looked at them as trying to evaluate with the translator. Here the choice of the words is not good. Attitude that we had. But now, we are forced to take translators seriously. Not simply to look at a translation as a manipulation, a translator is a manipulator, whether their ideology is manipulating the text, whether their religion is manipulating the text, whether their personal political interest is manipulating the text. So we also had this kind of state. We looked at the ideology of the translator, the religion of the translator making an impact on the translation, and things like that. But in the last 15 years, a new field is emerging, which we call as study of, not study of translations, translators. So we need to study translators. In literature, if we can study the authors and write biographies about them, write pages about them, focusing on the individual author or multiple authors, why not look at translators? Why not study them? Why not have biographies of them? When we are doing research, we don't get information about the translator except the name, if it is there. In some translations like subtitling, dubbing, we don't even get to know who has translated it. So in that sense, the Andrew Chesterman in the late years of the first decade of the 21st century has spoken about this translator studies. So in that context, we thought we should seriously engage with the translators. Some of our friends who in Hyderabad, we thought we'll pull them in, and we'll also put our own colleagues who have done translations. Because many of us are not just teachers of language, along with teaching a language, we also know one more language. So in that sense, we have dabbled with two languages or more languages. So in that sense, we are all, to put it negatively, have split personalities. So one of their personalities, not simply as language teachers, but as translators, should come to the fore, and that should serve as a kind of model to our students who are learning languages here. So if I already know one language, and if I am learning another language, how to make best use of it? How can I contribute to the language that has sustained me? Either when I work or when I am working as a professional, as a teacher of that language. So here are some models. We thought we should have interaction with them and how they came to the translate and why did they choose a particular text, what problems they encountered, not in translating, publishing it, and then marketing it. These are also very important issues for us. So all these issues, I thought we can have an interaction with them. So the format is like that. There will be two sessions. The first session will focus on translations from Indian languages into English or English into Indian languages. The second session will focus on people who have done translations between a foreign language and Indian language or from Indian languages into foreign language. So in these two sessions, we'll have discussions, and I'm grateful for all those people who readily agreed to our request to be here on this day. And I also thank all of those who are here. And with these remarks of the chair, I would like to conclude my few words. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to what our translators are going to say and how others are going to interact with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bharateshwar, for such a reflective speech, making us think a lot about translators and translations. Now, your job is not done yet, so you have to hand over a token of appreciation to the guest of the day, Dr. Salve. I thank all of you, and I welcome Dr. K. Kogilam to offer a vote of thanks to it.
Thank you. I would like to thank, first of all, our honorable VC in charge, Madam Professor Lakshmi, who has been so cooperative and then so supportive for all the departments to conduct their academic programs and for supporting and sanctioning whatever proposals. We are all very happy with that. And within the short period of her VC-ship, she has supported all the departments like anything, and it was like a mela for us in our. And apart from that, I also would like to thank our Dean, Professor Surpa Salve, for blessing event and for agreeing to be there with us. And of course, our Professor Tarak Kishore is here. And thank him for talking about the importance of translation and translation studies, and especially the translators. Like we need visibility of the translators, and we need to listen to the translators. And I feel personally that they are the ambassadors, linguistic ambassadors and cultural ambassadors, or say bridges. I mean, they are the ones who are building bridges between the languages and different cultures. So we are very eager to listen to all the translators. So welcome to the translators as well. I thank all the translators for accepting our invitation. And also apart from that, I thank all my senior and colleagues, Professor Nishita, Professor Shruti Sarkar, Srivani, yeah, and Leena, I could see, yes, and yeah, Anna Mary, Anna Pandey, not, I mean, I'm really happy. Also, Anjali is there, I can see. So I'm really happy and thank you all. And Uma, I'm sorry. Yes, and Monica, and all, right? So thank you all very much for coming to the program and making it a success. And apart from that, I hope that the other sessions also will be very interesting. And apart from that, I would like to thank all the TI, PUTI, and everyone, and also our PhD scholars and digital students and everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kokila ma'am. Now let's move on to the first session of the day. It is titled as Translating from Indian Languages into English, and for this I welcome Dr. Kamla Bhatt, Dr. Jayashree Srinivas Rao, Dr. P. Sangeeta of the dais, and I request Professor Lakshmi Haribati to chair the session. Please, welcome to the dais. Yeah, please. Dr. Kamla Bhatt, Dr. Jayashree Srinivas Rao, Dr. P. Sangeeta, and Professor Lakshmi Haribati will be the chair for the session. Before we move on, I request Maria from our department to give a brief introduction to all the speakers.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to our department celebration of International Mother Language Day. For our first discussion, we have our panel discussion on translating from Indian languages into English. And I'm very proud to introduce the panelists of the session. First, we have Dr. Kamla Bhatt. Kamla Bhatt is a professor of English at Ahmednagar College. Is a bilingual writer and a translator. Collections of poems in Kannada. His translations of Namdev Ghazal, Hemant Divati, and an anthology of poems from 10 Indian languages have been published. He has translated Jorge Luis Borges, This Craft of Verse, into Kannada. His translation of Kirtina Kurkuti is brought out by Penguin. His translation of Kannada feminist critique, M.S. Ashavati, is forthcoming from Manipal University. His translation of Ashok Vajpayee and Jayanta Mahapatra are also forthcoming. Next we have Dr. Jay Srinivas Rao. Jay Srinivas Rao translates across Kannada and English and has translated into English an early Kannada novel, Chandramukha Gadavu, and poems, stories, essays for the anthology Steel Mixers Sprouting, New Direct Writing from South India. His English translations of Kannada modernist poet K.V. Tirumalesh, Hyderabad poems have been appeared in Sishore, Politics of Cultural Translation, News India, and Maidana, and his Kannada translations of world poetry have appeared in mainstream Kannada literary journals like Avadi, Kenta Sambike, Bhasha Bharati, Rutumana, Akshara Sankata, and Minjuli. His English translations of Kannada short stories and essays have been published in various anthologies. For the past 1.5 years, he has been writing a fortnightly column called Loka Kavya Vihara for the prominent online Kannada literary magazine Kenta Sambiki, where he introduces a foreign poet along with Kannada translations of their poems. His fortnightly column, Forgotten Chapters on Kannada Arunodaya literature, appeared in the Hindu during January-December 2020. His research papers can be seen and read in various academic journals. His book of Kannada translations of 70 polished poems, Suridavu Galu, was published in April 2022 by Kuempu University, Karnataka. His book of Kannada translations of 130 poems by 21 poets from Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, titled Boti Kadala Galu, was released in January this year. His Kannada translation of Anna Akhmatova to poem is in press. And we have Dr. Sangeeta Pudiyaguttu. Dr. Sangeeta Pudiyaguttu is an assistant professor at the Department of Materials Development, Testing and Evaluation, IFLA. She has published articles of language studies, gender, folk narratives, and has edited Teaching English Literature in India, Pedagogy and Practice. She has recently translated Jay Mohan's memoirs from Malayalam to English of Men, Women, and Wishes, was published in one of the leading publishing houses in India. This session is chaired by Professor Lakshmi Haribanti. Professor Lakshmi Haribanti is the Senior Professor of the Department of Translation Studies, IFLU. Translation Studies for the past 27 years. She has authored 2 books on translation, edited 1 volume of research articles on translation, published a book of short stories in English translation from Telugu, edited a volume of Telugu translations from English, and published 33 research articles dealing with various aspects of translation studies, and also has to her credit 24 short stories in translation from Telugu to English and vice versa. Over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you, Maria, for that beautiful introduction of the translators. I think before I say anything, I have to apologize. I have to leave after 10 minutes. I have to attend the other meeting from the new Vice Chancellor. I have to listen to these translators. Maybe we can arrange a meeting or maybe online sessions with each of these translators, where we can discuss everything threadbare, giving them an hour's time. That will go a long way in getting the insights from the translators working. Being a translator, as she was mentioned, I think occasional short stories published from English to Telugu, Telugu to English. I have one full-fledged book, translation of stories, Telugu short stories into English, and recently this short volume of folk tales I translated from English into Telugu. So, if you were to ask me, not as a before that, I have to say all these translators who are assembled here, they are not translators by profession, but by passion. They are all teachers into teaching, but they also translate. So, so they are in a position to explain what they have done, how they have done, go into the process, take you into the process of the translation. So that will give you rich insights into the working of the translators. So briefly, I was taking this opportunity because I won't be there till then. 1 or 2 sentences about my own experience of translating. I enjoy translating both ways, from especially English to Telugu and Telugu to English, but I enjoy more when it comes to Telugu to English. And I must say, Telugu to English, I am more literal, not literal in the sense not making sense, literally transferring every word, not in that sense. But I work very close to the Telugu expressions, the way they express, the very perspective, the style, etc. All that really succeed in capturing my English translation. Though the ultimate end product may not read very well, those who are not familiar with Telugu language or culture may find it difficult to understand because of some of these Indianisms, Teluguization, they might say. But it gives an immense satisfaction to you, so that you could transfer everything, even the style of writing, the stream of thinking of the translator. Also, you could capture in your translation. It's not difficult. Only when it comes to English, so in a way you can. So my loyalty lies more with my source text rather than my target readers. And in this context, when I'm translating from an Indian language into English, I don't know who are my readers. My readers can be anybody. If it is if I'm translating English, my readers can be anybody, anywhere. Anybody who knows English can be my reader. I can't place them to a location, to a culture, to a language. So that also makes me not to think of my readership, but think of my source writer. So my total concentration is on the source writer, how to make him accessible to the wider audience. If a text is available in English, see, all the regional languages, if you don't translate them, they get confined only to that language. Only when you translate them into English, they get accessibility to wider audience, and there is also scope for that further translations into other Indian languages, because many translations in the Indian context happen indirectly through English. So somebody who doesn't know Telugu can also translate these stories from my English translation. Okay, so that way also the gap between the source and the ultimate translation of a translation may not be much if I am as close as possible to my source text. So in a way, this is a foreignization, and not only my own translations, even while reading translations of our prolific translators, famous translators who translated several texts from Telugu to English, like Uma and Sridhar, not Uma Sridhar, Uma and Sridhar. And Jayaprada. I've been reading all these translations as translator Sanakesha was explaining earlier. So in my initial days, I used to read these translations to know how they retrospectively would go into that process, how people translate from Telugu to English and all. So all the translations, I feel that not very clear, not very readable to somebody who doesn't know anything about Indian culture. Those who know Indian culture, they may be non-Telugus, but they easily follow, understand. If it is non-Indians, it's very difficult. So only distinction that we have to make in terms of readership when you are translating your literary text from an Indian language into English is whether it is meant for Indian audience or audience abroad. If it is meant for Indian audience, for instance, non-Telugu English leaders of India, I don't have to explain all those concepts and all, like from Puranas and Vedas, whatever we could say, Rama, Lakshmana, or Sita. We don't have to give explanation or our names of the gods or the festivals. Yes, so that is very advantage. We don't have to write a footnote for everything. If it is meant for international audience, you have to. Otherwise, they won't understand. Of course, nowadays, if they really want to know, nothing is impossible. Everything they can Google. And so in that way, it's the foreignization. And when it comes to English to Telugu, again, my approach is something different. I take little freedom, because I know that who are going to read my translations. Clearly, I can place them to a linguistic and cultural context. So I'm catering to a particular community, a group. So especially when I translated this folk tales, I know that folk tales are meant for children. So if there are some names which they can't pronounce, they are alien to them, why would I introduce a story using that? I mean, I don't have to be loyal or faithful to the translator. My intention is to make these stories available to children who can read by themselves, or the elders can read to them. So I took some freedom and then changed the names. Some Liti is there. The title of the story, Liti and other friends, and Liti is the principal character in that. So I made it Chitti. Similarly, some rich merchant, his name is Saboda. Saboda, it's not a familiar South Indian name, so I'm a rich merchant. So I made Ramaswamy, and the other place, same name, Govindaswamy. These are the merchants in our place. So there's no harm to the story, but a little bit of freedom I have exercised only for making these stories readable. So in a way, to sum up, my way of translation is like a domestication. Rest of the contents remain the same. Wherever I feel that certain things are alien and are my readers, children can't understand, they don't feel like reading if you use some name which is not known to them, I change it. That kind of liberty I've taken as a translator because it has to serve my purpose. Otherwise, why would I read? It's not like play or a game to translate it. I am doing it for some purpose to make it available to children of Telugu. So I've taken some liberties with that. Sometimes linguistic problems also come. For instance, in Telugu, you don't have and equivalent of our and you can just put a comma when you are writing. Comma would take care of it. Comma is like a coordinating conjunction in Telugu. But then, because of the influence of English and Hindi, people started using Mariu. Tarkeshwar Mariu Kokila, they say. So hard. Only non-Telugu speakers, non-native Telugus would say such things. Telugu speakers don't say. But in every story, most of the stories, the 16, 15 stories, many stories have this in the title, in the English. So I had no choice. So I have kept that Mariu, used that Mariu in the title, but nowhere else in the stories I use this, only in the titles. For instance, if I say Ramu and Syamu or something, Ram, Kama, Shyam, I say, it doesn't look like a title. So for that sake, I have added Mariu, but nowhere in that story I use this, but I explain why I had to use that in my translator's note. So it's a kind of a domestication I have done to reach my readers, to reach my specific audience that I have in mind. Except that it's not like I don't honor the respect the source text or source author. It's only to meet my purpose and my context. So as Tarkesh was saying, so many things I just want to say. One last point before I conclude and hand over to our translators. See, it is the context that becomes very important. In what context you are translating a particular text? Okay, so what text you are translating? Yes, of course, that is important. The linguistic text, but the contextual aspects become more important than the textual aspects. Like somebody with some ideology might translate as a feminist text or non-feminist text can be converted into a feminist text also. Okay, so anyway, it's time to leave. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I really miss you. I congratulate my translators who are present here. Sorry, I'm missing you, but I look forward to some other opportunity to meet and interact with you. And Jaya Srinivas Rao, I've been reading his translations and is a prolific translator of poetry. We know that poetry is the most challenging of all the other genres, but he has specialized that he is someone who has specialized in this particular genre. So you should interact with him more. And I also congratulate and thank Amlakar Bhatt for having come here and ready to share his experience with you. And Sangeeta is our own colleague. So I wish you all the best and we look forward to more and more translations from you so that as the dear nations we can dissect and in your translations. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you so much, Professor Lakshmi, for sharing your experience and predicament as a translator. Now I invite Professor Amlakar Bhatt to share his experience. Thank
Thank you, and I want to first of all thank EFLU and the Department of Translation Studies of the EFLU for organizing this Translators Meet and giving us translators a platform. I especially thank Tarkeshwar for inviting me to be a part of this. I was assuming, or perhaps even hoping, that this will be more interaction, that we will have moderators who would throw questions at us and we respond, which perhaps would have made my job a little easier. However, I hope at some point, maybe at the end of the session, we'll have some space for I will try to restrict myself to sharing with you my experience of translating this particular book, which came out recently. This is a collection of essays translated from Kannada into English. These essays are, of course, literary. These are by Kannada critic. His name is Kirtina Kurturi. He was born in 1928 and died in 2013, and a major Kannada critic and scholar. So he started writing around 1958, thereabout. He started writing difficult around that time, and he kept on publishing right into you know, the first decade of 20th century. So from there are essays selected from several of his collections. So there are many difficulties, many questions that you also might it might occur to you when one is translating. Essays, what yardstick one uses to select, and those are also the initial problems that I faced. Because he has written more than 25 books of literary criticism, diverse kinds of criticism. There is column writing. There are prefaces that get written to several writers when they first publish, so on and so forth. Now, and of course, some of them were written as a book. I think perhaps 2 or 3 books. Most of the others were assembled later, compiled into a book. Now, in selecting, if you are translating one single book, that is something, bring them together, face this question of how to achieve kind of harmony. So these are the initial questions that I faced. One of the advice I got when I started wondering what to select and what not to, because another. So one of selecting the best, try to look for what might be of interest to the contemporary readers. So that is one of the things that that kind of paved the way for me to make up my mind. And finally, what I did was I thought I'll do 2 things in translating and putting them together and compiling this as. My purpose was to do 2 things. One is to introduce Kirtinath Kurtkoti as an important somebody who has made an important intervention in Indian aesthetics. The second was to introduce, through his work, Kannada literature to non-Kannada readers. So it has so happened that nearly half of the book are the essays that introduce Kannada literature from 10th century to 21st century, kind of the entire spectrum. He has done that kind of work. And the remaining half have essays of Kurtkoti that under literary theory, and also some of them are textual analysis. So these are the kinds of works that have gone into this. Now, the first, I that there are 3 specific kinds that I face. I don't know. I mean, earlier Professor Takeshwar made a distinction between translation scholars and translators, and I definitely am not a translation studies person. I have not done any systematic study of translation and stuff, so you people perhaps are better informed that way. But when I first started translating Kurtkoti, I thought that because it's going to be in English, it's not likely to be for a general English reader. It is likely to be the of my translated work are likely to be academic readers, primarily students and teachers and researchers in the field of literary studies. So initially, first when I did the first few essays, when I first translated the first few, I tried to translate them into a kind of an academic language. So, but then before long, I also started noticing, and a couple of people to whom I showed these translations, they also told me that this is going to be a bit problematic, especially taking into account Kurtkoti's own practice of criticism. So that is when I realized. So this is the technical kind of problem that I faced. Technical problem. I say technical problem because what kind of a language do you translate literary criticism into? So because most of these are not written as academic, essays. Perhaps his first couple of books were written in that kind of a manner, but most of the other works from which I have selections, they are not written, from. It's not. They were written. So many of these were written as columns, so it is not meant for only academic readers. So then I have to change my strategy and try to write in a prose, try to use an English prose that is less academic. So this is the first kind of phase. The second was an ethical problem that I faced. I say ethical because, Kurtkoti was an English professor. He taught all his life in SP, Sardar Patel University in Anand, Vallabh Vidyanagar, Gujarat. And he has also written a few stray essays in English. Maybe there are many, I don't know how many there are, but he has written. So he was perfectly capable of writing all this in English, and perhaps he would have done a great job. But he must, perhaps he has compelling reasons, or he had his own, perhaps, commitment, why not to. I really did not try to find out. It is not impossible to find out. One can talk to his family members, his friends and well-wishers, and there were many people who he was very close to. One could have spoken to them and understood his reasons why he did not write in English. But whether somebody who wanted to place his thoughts to the Kannada reading public, whether it is ethically appropriate to, take him across into English. This was one of the, and also let me state it here that throughout his career, he was very keen on one thing, this whole idea of not living in the singular framework of the Western perspective, the English perspective, the colonial perspective. So right from his first work, he makes that important aspect of his perspective. But the reasoning I used in overcoming this, let us say, ethical confusion I had was was this that through Kurtkoti, it was possible to introduce to a larger audience a number of important. I mean, an archive that a lot about Kannada literature, that a lot of non-Kannada literature, students, literature, scholars, and also his contribution to Indian aesthetics, the way in which he has extensively used from Sanskrit aesthetics and how he has tried to expand it, elaborate it. These, I think, needed to be made available to non-Kannada readers. The third problem that I faced was maybe I can term it as a social problem, which is this, that see, Kurtkoti, it is said, he wrote far less than he spoke. And he apparently spoke, wherever he was and with whoever about literature all the time. He kind of breathed, inhaled and exhaled literature. That's what people say about him. He used to visit Karnataka during vacations, and during that period, whenever he would go to Dharwad, that's his not hometown but adopted town, his favorite town, and there he was the advisor of a publication, publishing unit there called Manohara Granthmala, and on the attic of Manohara Granthmala would assemble a number of people, people who are interested in literature, and there is this legend in Kannada literary circles about the kind of literary conversations that happened with Kirtinath Kurtkoti being the center of attraction. And but this is not the only space where he spoke. He would visit number of colleges and universities and public functions where he would be invited to speak, and he would readily go not only to big universities and big cities, but even to small taluka places, or even smaller places where he is invited. To talk about literature, he would go anywhere. This is what I've learned. So, what people who knew him say is that he would be ready to talk about literature anywhere, anytime. So, the amount of talks he has given about literature is perhaps far bigger in terms of volume than what he has written. But there is something very similar to his writing style and to his talks from the account that I have got from people who were familiar with his talks, which is that he spoke very fluently, and he had this great memory, and he would quote from epics, many passages, any time, from any number of words, so on and so forth. But importantly, he also would not spend time mentioning who that quotation is from, because he assumed a certain familiarity in his audience as well. And that style we see even in his writing. His writings, quotations, you have to go and find out. He doesn't mark those quotations. But because he quoted very often from Sanskrit and ancient Kannada, what we call as Halagannada, which is ancient Kannada. So you can make out, oh, this is a quotation simply because it's not in the contemporary style. But otherwise, it is difficult to make out. So, but what is the effect there? The effect is this, that for him, I think literary criticism was really what can be called as circular samad. What it means is it's a kind of a intimate conversation, an intimate literary conversation. His writing also, most of his writings, except maybe one or two books that he wrote initially, follow that pattern, especially the literary columns that he wrote, from which number of essays are selected in this book. They all follow that pattern. So there, he's taking it for granted that his audience are familiar with what he's, saying. The writer he's talking about, concepts he's referring to, the poems or words that he's alluding to. All this, he assumes a familiarity. So there is a certain kind of equivalence between the speaker, the writer, and the audience. That is not the case with what I'm doing. For me, when I translate, I'm translating it not to a Sahridaya who is already familiar with the subject of Kurchukoti. So that was another issue that I had to deal with. So these are some of the let us say translation related problems that I had to handle. Many other in terms of translation strategies that are being used. I'm sure all of you are familiar with these and how each translator finds his own way out of it. For example, I'll just mention one. For example, he in his writings, he very often uses short sentences, very short sentences. Whereas in translating them, I have opted to try to. So these are some of the freedoms I have taken, and also sometimes I have he has of course quoted for many of these essays that I wrote poetry, narrative poetry, or even lyric poetry. So when I have to translate, very often I haven't translated them into the poetic form, preferring to very often prose translations of those, because I was mainly getting at across the meaning rather than reconstructing the original ancient Kannada poetry, etc. So this issue is another, when you're quoting, you're not doing literary translation. You're only quoting, you're only translating a quotation of a literary work. And then what is the status of that kind of a translation? You're not giving attention to genre at all. It's a poem, and it is in the original. It follows a certain meter and all that, and you don't really translate that. You don't give attention to the form in this translation. These are some of the problems that I also had to deal with. I'm sure in the discussion, many more issues related to translation choices I made might come up. I'll respond at that point in time. Thank you very much for having me in this meet. And
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar, for sharing your dilemmas as a translator, the problem of choice, the problem of selection, the social and ethical dilemmas. Thank you so much for sharing. And now I invite Dr. Jay Srinivas Rao for his experience, to share his experiences.
Thank you, Department of Translation Studies, EFL University, for inviting me to this talk. Thank you, Tarakeshwar, for this. And a few things. So this is the recently released book, Baltic Guardian. It's translated from the countries. I'm not saying translated from those languages. These are poems translated from English into Kannada. Poems written by poets of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Okay, it's a very strange choice. Normally, when we talk about translations, especially poetry, we don't go that far. Estonia, Latvia, these countries on a day-to-day basis. Once in 6 months or somewhere we hear about Latvia, something happening in Lithuania, yeah. But these, countries are beyond our. That's not the only reason why I, wanted to translate. But right from the beginning, when I started translating poetry into Kannada, I took on a path which was less traveled. My first collection of translated poems was poems from Poland, which I translated into Kannada through their English translations. We are all familiar with, as literature students, many Kannada scholars, Kannada writers, we are all familiar with English poets, American poets, African poets, and some European poets through their English translations, from Latin American poets through their English translations. But for me, apart from all these, a number of English poets, a number of African poets, a couple of Latin American poets, one French poet, one Spanish poet here and there. Apart from that, I wanted to see what is happening in these other countries. Eastern Europe, particularly. I wanted to go there and see. Extremely curious about poetry. I'm sure there was a lot of poetry happening there, writing poems. Just out of curiosity that we had earlier poems translated from Poland, essays, stories from Poland translated into Kannada through their English translations. They were there earlier too. It was restricted to one or we are familiar with Wisława Szymborska and Czesław Milosz and poets, a couple of poets. But I wanted to go and see what is happening there. Once I went in, I couldn't come out. So then the only way out was translation. So it was like getting into the Chakravyuha and not knowing how to come out. So translation was my path to come out of this poetry thing in Poland. So I translated around 70 poems, 14 poets. So that was the first sort of thing that I tried. So after Poland, I wondered where should I go next. Then I translated a number of poets, Bulgarian poets. Then I thought, let me go to places which nobody has heard of. Nobody has heard of it since it's there in the consciousness, but we don't encounter these names regularly. So let me see. Baltic republics, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Let me go there and see what is happening. And then I found, oh my God, international poets. Poets have won huge, accolades from across Europe. International poets, we have never heard of them. So I was instantly kind of got into that, and it was another Chakravyuha into these three countries. So I went in there and then read a lot of poets one by one, tried my hand at translating from their English translations. So I don't know Latvian or Lithuanian or Estonian languages. Then I interacted with all these poets. Some of them are no more, but most of them I interacted with them. All of them are there on Facebook, and I started translating these poems and posting them on Facebook, and made friends with them. They were so enthusiastic that, like we haven't heard of Estonia, they hadn't heard of Kannada. Okay, they don't know anything about. They know India, that India somewhere is there in the consciousness, but through maybe Rabindranath Tagore or one of these famous names. But apart from that, they have no idea that. Okay, some poets have some idea about Sanskrit. They have read some of. One poet has translated the Mahabharata into Lithuanian. So these examples are there, but by and large, most of these poets had no idea about a language, like Kannada or that exists here. One poet's poem had been translated into Kannada, and a couple of poets have been translated into Hindi. But apart from that, it's a sort of dry area. So that was the first motivation. So I went and went to these places, collected their poems, purchased books of their collections. Remarkably, there are so many poems out there, essays, short stories of writers from these three countries which are available online. One has to search with a little bit of patience. Even if you simply type poets from Lithuania, you will get a huge list there. And these are all international poets, of that range. Uh, so that's how this book happened. It took me 3 years to put all these together, one by one, translating one poem at a time. Getting feedback from Kannada speakers, Kannada poetry lovers. There were quite a few of them who welcomed this warmly. So that's how this book came about. This has 130 poems, 21 poets, 7 poets each from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Probably I sent a copy of this book to each of the poets. So probably for the first time a Kannada book has reached these countries. They were so happy, and they would say that the script of your language is so very different. It looks so different. All these curly letters that you have in your language. Many of them were they were pleased, happy that somebody sitting in some corner of India translating them to language they've never heard of. So that experience was really great, and they were so happy. They sent me, once they received the books, they sent me pictures of them holding the book, and then I posted them again on Facebook. And they were so pleased with this whole experience. Okay, so this is about this thing. Now coming to the translation part of it. Right from I started translating poetry 5 years ago. I mean, into Kannada. I was never confident of my Kannada, as a literary kind of language. Though my mother tongue is Kannada, I grew up in different states in South India. On my own, I went to Pune. I grew up in Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and all these things. So the language that we speak at home is sort of a community dialect to which I belong. So I've never been exposed to either standard Kannada or literary Kannada throughout my school days. Very little. So, of course, then I came back to Karnataka, did my degree and all these things. By the time I had started reading in Kannada, and I was very happy to read novels and poems and all these things in Kannada. But I never thought that one day I would translate it. So my first instinct when I started, incidentally, when I was doing a PhD, I worked on translation and the early novel in Kannada. So in one sense, I'm also a translation theorist, like many of you. So I worked on this aspect, read a lot of translation theory, and tried to incorporate them into my work and all these things. Later, this itch to translate, it came about to see whether I can actually translate. So my first attempt was to translate from confident of my Kannada. So I got my English knowledge of Kannada. So I translated one of the early novels that was written in Kannada. That was also part of my PhD work. I translated that into English. I was happy with that in the sense that first thing I was happy that I was able to translate. So that was one big relief for me that I can translate. People read that book, and then I got some response for that and all these things. And later I went on to translate for this anthology of Dalit literature. Steel Nips Are Sprouting, from Kannada to English. So it was all from Kannada to English. Never did I think that I was going to translate that to poetry into Kannada. And it's all thanks to Kamalakar. During the Corona lockdown period, Kamalakar, even earlier than that, he had started this thing, series on Facebook called Anudina Anuvada, one translation a day. So he would translate one poem of a foreign author from various countries from their English translations into Kannada and post them on Facebook. And it was a big treat for all of us. Many Kannada readers, poetry lovers would read his translations on a daily basis, and there was a lot of feedback, discussion about the translation, the author. This happened, and then the more I started reading, I felt that no, this is reaching a breaking point. Now I have to try my hand. I can't So then, with great hesitation, I translated Seamus Heaney's poem called "Digging." Okay, it's an Irish poet, writes in English, Nobel Prize winner. Digging, I don't know why I read Seamus Heaney's poem for the first time, and I felt that this poem, Digging, I have to translate it into Kannada. So there was confidence that let me see what happens. It's kind of hit or miss kind of thing. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it's not going to work. So I started translating. One thing that caught my mind, if you have read the poem Digging by Seamus Heaney, it's about a potato farmer harvesting a potato in a field, right? The poet's grandfather, the poet remembers his father and his grandfather harvesting potato from the potato field and all the memories that it brings to him. And it had a lot of sights and sounds. Yeah, it was all kinds of you could feel the color, you could feel the the texture, the smell, the sounds. Yeah, so I wanted to capture all those things into. So the only way that I could do was to stick very close to the original. In one sense, if you talk about Indian this one. Of course, we grow potatoes in India also. But when we talk about harvest, we talk about wheat harvest or rice harvest. We don't talk about potato harvest. Potato is very specific to Ireland in that sense. So I wanted to capture the sights and sounds and all those things. I wanted to stick very close to the original to capture that. I did the translation and I showed it to Kamalakar. Kamalakar said this has come out very well, and I was pleased with that. After that, it was like I just went on poetry. So my method of translation is stay very close to the original as much as possible. Without trying to harm the Kannada sentence structure, syntax, or whatever. I mean, I can't talk in grammatical terms in that way. This is the thing. Stick very close to the source language. So that's how I have worked out. When we talk about it, I'll talk in further detail about this. This is just a brief intro. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeshwas Rao, for sharing your process as your own process as a translator, the hesitations, the struggles, and how you translate international languages. Now I request Dr. P. Sangeeta for her to share her experience as a translator.
Thank you, Pratya. Now, while I was listening, I realized that I'm actually not a translator. I'm an accidental translator because, in some sense, I did not set out to be a translator. I like reading, and I read both in my native mother tongue, that is Malayalam, and in English. But like the other two translators have shared with you, I also felt more comfortable with English rather than Malayalam. I read Malayalam, and then I also realized there's a hierarchy in languages. I teach English language, I teach the history of English language. I teach, but I was a student of literature. And then I realized that there's definitely a hierarchy in language, among languages. If you are writing in English, your reach is massive. If you write in a native language, a vernacular language, your reach is very restricted. You might be an enormously talented writer, but you would reach a very minuscule audience. The way you are rewarded, everything is dependent on your choice of language. And there was this writer, enormously talented, he's still alive. He is, in fact, you might know him as the script writer of Ponniyin Selvan. Yes. So this is the J. Mohan. He's a bilingual writer, in fact. He writes both in Tamil and in Malayalam. He belongs to this, an area which borders Kerala and Tamil Nadu, like Belgaum in where two languages. So he writes both in Malayalam and in Tamil. So there was this writer who spoke to me, and there is this tiny volume of stories where he was speaking about his own experiences and the land where he is from. So this is the book, the original book. It is called Uravidangal. Uravidangal, if I translate it literally, it means the origins. So he is talking about where he is from, the family he was born into, the traditions, the customs and you might be aware that the traditions of Kerala, especially, as we are a matrilineal family. Okay, most of the family names are passed on through the mother. The father plays a very marginalized role, in fact. The property is passed from mother to daughter and her children. So this entire way of life, which was there, which has been kind of, marginalized, which has been, swept off the pages of history. This is what he captures. And he captures a life in the Kanyakumari district, which was once a part of Travancore and which is no longer part of Kerala, but has now gone to Trivandrum based on linguistic reorganization of states. So this writer and his experiences are very raw. So did I have the guts to, how did I have the guts to translate him? It's because I was a novice. I had no clue what I was getting into when I signed up to translate him. So I started translating him, and after a chapter or so, I contacted the writer and asked him, "May I translate your work?" And he's such a sweet person. He just said, of course, he had not read a single line of what I had written, and still he said, "Yes, please go ahead." And so I translated his entire work. Of course, there were words which were very localized. In fact, if some of you know Malayalam and then you compare the text, you will realize that there are words like, for instance, which refers to a certain flea which attacks the cow. I have never, been in a family which owned a cow, let alone know what the particular term for a flea is. And then he writes not just of Tamil, he includes very obscure words. His language is very elusive, sometimes allegorical. So, how do you translate a writer like that? Was a question which faced me when I actually started translating. And then sometimes I would just call him up and ask him, "What do you mean by this?" He was so gracious. Probably he thought that this young woman not even young woman, a middle-aged woman, wouldn't even probably know what we are talking about. So anyway, so he was very patient. He took the time to explain sometimes. Not many times. I only had to call him twice or thrice. But the thing was that just knowing that he approved of it, the original author, was something that sustained me. Okay, now comes the next part of it. Once I finish translating, what do I do with it? Even as I was translating, I explored the possibility of getting it published. So I sent the proposal to a couple of publishers. They didn't respond. So I didn't. Then I just went ahead and if something happened before that. Juggernaut published one of his works in between, and Stories of the Truth. So J. Mohan, who's a star writer in Tamil and Malayalam, began to be read in English as well. So it was Priyambada, the other translator, who actually cut a lot easier, because once Stories of the Truth and it became a bestseller. So for me, it was much more easy. So I sent it as the proposal to the. I submitted it to their link where we were supposed to submit proposals. Something happened that they sent the proposal to a literary agent, and the literary agent contacted me and said that he's really interested and to send him his my manuscript. So I went through the manuscript one. Now, while translating, and that is how it got published. But what happened? What was the process of translating? Here, Professor Haribandhi said that she was trying to stay close to the authentic language as possible. My intention was both actually. I wanted to stay authentic, but also I wanted to have a language that did not, feel alien while you read. So when I finished, it was, I would translate only a couple of pages a day. I would actually read it aloud to hear the voice of the text in English, so that if there was anything that felt amiss, I would like to correct it. This was one thing. The other was they were very, it was culturally inscribed, the language. Some of it, for instance, in this is the book which came out in English. It's called Of Men, Women and Witches. I did not use the term witches inside the text. This was just there in the title. The word I used is yakshi. Yakshi, if you are familiar with, in South Indian cultural, idea of what is a yakshi, you will understand why I refuse to use witches. Witches is a term which was culturally very inscribed, well inscribed. You know what a witch is. It has negative connotations. I didn't want to use it to refer to a woman who was imagined as a very beautiful woman, extremely beautiful. She lures men, she taps into the fantasy of man, which yearns for the perfect female form. Okay, and then she lures them because their lust is in some sense her hook. That is where she hooks into, and she devours them, leaving nothing. Okay, just a couple of bones and nails. So she lives on top of the palm trees. She does not devour all men. She only devours men who lust for her. Okay, so any man who is not lusty is spared. So how do I capture nuanced being into a term like witches? That wouldn't do. So I thought that if the Irish can use the banshee, why not? Why shouldn't I use yakshi? So I transcribed the term, and then there were other instances where I did not actually. For instance, this author refers to Udapadu. Udapadu is actually translated as a song of the devil. So there I did not insist on Udam or Udam. But it is, so you will find that I took the call on when I felt it should be transcribed, and I took the call on when I felt that it could be translated. So these are the things I did. Sometimes I actually used both. For instance, there's a reference to balichor. Balichor is actually the rice that you offer to the dead, and the raw rice, the cooked plain rice and sesame seeds. Now, so I kept balichor and then put it in brackets, offering it for the dead. So Sometimes I went for both, but my thumb rule for throughout the translation process was if someone picked up and read the text, I wanted the text to be an aesthetic experience, beautifully written, not something which I tried to capture what the original author was trying to say, all the time. So sometimes, yes, I did use translation because a word which is there in Malayalam may not capture the nuances if I use just another word in English. So what I did was I tried to capture the spirit rather than the literal meaning. So that was my experience with translating of men, women, and witches. And as you can see, even the title is completely different. I didn't go with the origins because actually the publisher said, let's go with the origins. I said that no, I would rather that it captured, it gave a clue to what was within the book rather than, a translation. I read a short section from this section was shared by the scroll and this excerpt. So it is called the matriarchs. At Tiruvattar, at my father's ancestral house, apart from the popular portrait of the Maharaja, half turned and in his visually crowned, the only pictures that hung on the walls were the two matriarchs. The elder one looks as though she were commanding the photographer to get it done with. She stands bare-shouldered, the gold-bordered dhoti tied tightly around her chest. The lobes for years are stretched in the fashion of the day with heavy traditional earrings. These actually have names. Pambadavu is the name for the heavy earrings that stretches the lobe up to that was a style at that time. I didn't want to use terms like that because the earrings and Pambadavu would be quite different. They wouldn't even evoke the image in the mind. That is what I thought. So the other matriarch, her daughter, my father's mother, wears a jumper with a fine dhoti casually thrown over her shoulder. She looks into the camera, her head slightly tilted, scornfully dismissing the cameraman. When she first visited the house after walking along the length and breadth of it, exploring the rooms, the veranda, the courtyard, the kitchen, and the attic, Arunmari asked. Arunmari is Jaymohan's wife. Why are there no photographs of the fathers? I'd asked my grandmother the same question when she was alive. Her response was, this is my house. Why should I keep their photographs? When grandmother went away into the house, her current consort, Kaipalli Gopalan, slammed the coconut he was dehusking on the digging bar, took off the towel he had tied around his head, wiped the sweat off his face, smiled broadly and said, even if she wanted to keep them, she will need a photo gallery like the Papanavaram Palace that one. She had many sambandhams. Most of her partners were Brahmins. When Arunmari repeated her question once again, I replied, I'm still searching. Once I find all of them, there is a possibility that I compose an autobiography like Alex Haley's. For Haley, the issue was his roots. I don't have an issue with that. I'm more concerned with the birds that live in the tree for a brief while. The novel will be called Birds. What do you think of the name? Then he says, jokes aside, I have every intention to write an epic about my lineage. 8 years ago, I even announced its name, Ashokavanam. In fact, there has been a lot of discussion among Tamil literati about this unwritten novel. Meanwhile, I have finished 3 large novels. For some reason, Ashokavanam was yet to materialize. The matriarchs appear reluctant to talk in Tamil. Now I have completely stopped trying to write it. Maybe one day it will come. So another thing that interested me was, quite often we do not hear about customs that are not mainstream. The mainstream customs, in fact, the mainstream is getting reinforced again and again through the, through a pattern of making whether it is cultures, whether it is religion, one. The nuances that existed from region to region is lost. So one factor that prompted me, the selection of this particular book was also the fact that it captures a time when which we don't no longer have. In fact, the communist government actually banned the matrilineal system of property inheritance in 1975. So anyone born after 1975 cannot inherit their property which belonged to their mothers. It goes through the father. So that is it. And I think now I will take this. I mean, we can have 2 questions. Was it too short?
No, that was short enough. Thank you so much, Dr. Sangeeta, for sharing your experience as a translator and reading out excerpts from your book. Thank you so much. Now the floor is open for questions, and we have just 5 minutes because we have another session which is due, and these questions can be amongst the panelists and from the audience as well.
Am I audible?
Yes.
My question is to Professor J. Srinivas Rao. Sir, it was really interesting knowing about your poetries and that you talked about, and the remote areas that you have chosen. So I just wanted to know, like, these are 21 poetry, from the 3 different countries. Was it easier for you to get the copyright, because I feel they are quite contemporary writers?
They're all contemporary writers, and I sought their permission, and they said you can go ahead and publish, and go ahead and translate and publish. So there was no signed copyright or anything in that way. So even the translators knew about this when I was translating. I asked each poet, I wish to bring this out as a book, I would need your consent. And I also told them that this will be a non-commercial public, in the sense that I won't be getting any money out of it. That I'm not getting any royalty or so that's how this thing works. So they gave me some 15 copies of the book. That's all I got. I didn't get any money for this book. So it took me 3 years to write it. I would have been happier with some money if I had got some money. But that's how these things work. In Kannada, this one, they give you some copies of the book, 20, 25, 50, whatever this one. Hoping that you sell these books and then you get the money for yourself. But who has the patience to go and sell all these books? So the copyright thing never came up in that sense. There was no formal signing of copyright. I asked their consent, told them that this is going to be a non-commercial publication, and they kind of said that please go ahead and publish. We don't have any issues with that. So that's how it came about.
I have a contrary experience. There was a Central European poet who I asked permission before. I used to like J. Srinivas Rao. I also used to basically put it out on Facebook. No print magazine publication, basically on Facebook. But after taking the permission of the poet. So this one particular Central European poet, he gave his publisher's address. Of course, I didn't.
But my experience throughout these years has been that the poets are generally happy if their poems are translated into another language. More than 40, 50 poets, I have kind of translated them. I have told them that I sent them the link, not only from Facebook. I have been writing this column for the last 1.5 years now, Loka Kavya Vihara, where I translate, write an introduction about the poet and then translate the poems, 8, 9, whatever number that I could translate. And then this published in this online journal called Kendasampidi. So when I sent the link, they happily kind of share it on their wall, and then you will find sometimes 50 to 60 of their compatriots, friends saying, "Congratulations, your poem has been published in Kannada," and they're curious about the language. Most of the times, so far, I mean, touch wood, nobody has kind of objected that why are you translating my poem? Please talk to me about that. It's just so far not happened. I hope that because see, I'm not getting even one paisa written. I spent a lot of money sending this book to Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, to all these poets. So it is a kind of I like doing it. I'm happy doing it. Sometimes I get called to meets like this, and then it gives me an opportunity to talk about this. Some people, the book has been received warmly. People have purchased it. Publishers say that people are buying this book. So that's.
I was paid for the translation, and they, according to the contract, they also offered me 15% of the book sales. So it is not as if translation is not something that won't be. And of course, I had no intention of when I set out to do it, I had no idea of charging for the publication. But Juggernaut published.
And these publishers are very clear right from the beginning. We say that in Kannada we call it as Gaurava Dhana. Yeah, right. Gaurava Dhana they call it. Gaurava Dhana means it could be anywhere from 10 rupees to 10,000 rupees. So it's our Gaurava means out of this one respect we are giving you this. So accept it happily or unhappily, whatever it is. So it's called Gaurava Dhana. Right at the beginning they told that now Gaurava, we are not giving any Gaurava Dhana for the publication of this.
Maybe translation for honorarium.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so I never said out Gaurava. Yeah. So whatever Gaurava that we get is.
Any other question, Rihanna?
It was really interesting to listen to all of you. I think I should congratulate you people on behalf of our department for doing such a wonderful job. And Kamlakar part doing the critical things, I think it's really challenging. And of course, poetry and other things also are really challenging. It's like I was wondering, in fact, recently I came into contact with some people from Ukraine. So they are working in internet, but they are Ukrainian people. They were also very happy, to know that I am working in translation studies department, and they were also interested in getting their poetry. Poetry written by some famous authors in Ukraine like that. But the thing is because we come through English, that's the problem. I think I don't know whether you knew all those languages.
No.
Yeah, through English only you did.
Through English only, yeah. That's very clear. I mentioned the name of translators. Some of the translators know that I am translating.
Yeah. They were saying. I thought some of our faculty members, they can do it to Russian. I told them, if you get it done in Russian or if it is done in Russian, our people are ready to do it from Russian into other Indian languages. So I was thinking, how do you people face those challenges? Like this is for Kamlakar, right? I mean, how did you manage to? Because it is too technical, right?
Yes.
How do you manage to overcome those technical problems? For poetry, they can change, they can take liberty, but for criticism kind of things and something which is very theoretical.
It wasn't that difficult. Translating Kurtkoti, I didn't come across too many issues. It was initially I thought it was very easy, in fact. But the difficulty is very subtle. One could actually translate without even beginning to realize those problems. So it is in those smaller aspects of the issues related to translation that the difficulties arise. Otherwise, one can translate very easily. There were, of course, some issues. Some of the, for example, with Kutkoti, what happens is that you don't know when he is using a concept from, some Sanskrit theoretician, when he is coining his. So that is something that you have to. Then I had to rely on other scholars, ask them, scholars who are Kutkoti, people who have worked on in Kannada, and or scholars who are like Kutkoti, who have similar familiarity with the terrain of Sanskrit poetics and Sanskrit intellectual resources. So that is how, through various consultations, in a way, as all of us know, translation is not, one individual, one behind that individual, there are many who kind of contribute in terms of consultation, in terms of suggestions and advice. So that definitely happened in my case. Many people helped me to understand, what Kutkoti meant by a certain usage, or by coining a certain term, or giving a certain kind of an interpretation to a text. There is one perhaps interesting one. There is a word that comes in the poet called as Adi Kavi in Kannada, the primary poet in Kannada, Pump. And the word is Pademant, which basically means renown. And it refers to Karna. So it refers to the renown that Karna has. Now, Kutkoti gives a twist to this, and contrary to all other interpretations of that line, he says that, this says something about how, this is where, what Professor Takeshwar earlier said about Benjamin's notion of afterlife becomes literal, in fact, because, these texts are aware of the earlier, the original text, or the earlier, previously existing text. So this word, by using words like Pademat, the word renown, he is already indicating that, this is something that has come from there is a text existing before, and it has a certain kind of a circulation, and it is kind of pointing back at that. So various such levels one does have to, one has to kind of, I suppose, deal at individual instances.
Just to add to what Kamlakar was saying about Kutkoti, he was also a theoretician of translations. The number of essays that he has written about translations, one can do a PhD on it. And as he said, he was aware of Sanskrit poetics, he was aware of the Western poetics, and he could combine both and give a new insight into certain impasses that we had in Kannada literary circles. For example, BM Shri is supposed to be the one who used a modern Kannada in poetry. No, only in his translations he uses modern poetry. In his own writings he uses what is generally called as old Kannada. Adiga, in the Navya period, writes a poem about BMC country and poses a question: why this dichotomy? And he simply says it's a dichotomy. And it is Kutkoti who breaks it and tries to understand it. And it was possible for him because he could look at it from a fresh eyes. And I think the Kutkoti, translating some of these essays into English would give us insights the way what Benjamin essays gives into context. The tea is waiting, we can discuss more.
Thank you so much. Let's break for tea, have some snacks, and let's get back after 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
ಇನ್ನೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಕಡಿಮೆ ಅಂತ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದು.